Hello, boys and girls. It's been a while since we've done an unboxing, hasn't it? Well, we got some good choices today. Two rather large packages, one of which is from our good friend JDC Outlet from Canada, and then the other one is from a new friend of mine, Roy Dam, from Las Vegas, who on Facebook, he runs a group called Mod Media Group Archive, and I'll put the link to it in the description if you want to join up if you're on Facebook, so that way you can hopefully find some films that are otherwise kind of difficult to come by. Um, and if they've released a physical release or not, or whatever the case may be. But before we open that up, I want to show you something that I want to say it came last week, but it is something that, because it was the only singular item, I wasn't worth making a video out of, but it was VHS 2, the version that has the Blu-ray and DVD and the VHS tape, which is a really cool release. Now, I did used to have this movie, but I did not have the I didn't have the Blu-ray with the slipcover, and I didn't have the one that came with the VHS tape. And there's the slip box there. But so what makes that cool is so like here's the inside. So there's a bit of, if you guys remember big box VHS tapes, they used to sometimes have that bit of cardboard in there to kind of make it jut out a little bit more. And then there's a little something here to kind of house the actual Blu-ray here. The only, I'll be honest with you, so I was a 90s and early 2000s kid, and so VHS tapes that I remember, they came in boxes like this, or they came in the clamshell kind that Disney movies would often get. Now, I think as far as traditional big boxes go, they would be either the clamshells or like the one that I remembered, because my family, we didn't adopt DVD right away. It took us a few years, but if you remember, like, I remember the Shrek VHS tape, it had some cardboard here to kind of pad it out a little bit. So I think some big boxes, they would do something similar to that in the classic, like, 80s video store era, which, you know, people older than me would probably be able to talk about more than I could. But yeah, for me, VHS tapes for like non-Disney movies tended to come in these just normal cardboard sleeves, and you had to grasp these kind of tightly or else the tape would slip right out. But yeah, it's a real VHS tape, which is really cool, really authentic to the experience. And it comes in this box that looks really aged and worn, but it's not. But I like that deliberately aged and worn look. And of course, a older format like VHS, you know, like there is a certain, like it's not at all comparable to Blu-ray or 4K, of course, but there is a certain charm to VHS that I think, you know, I can understand why people have nostalgia for it, and for vinyl records, which vinyl records are kind of different because those technically are still the top tier in terms of audio quality, whereas VHS tapes are definitely not in terms of video quality, but they do still have a charm to them in a way that, say, like cassette tapes or 8-track tapes or something, in a way that those don't. And I've heard that Beta was technically better quality than VHS, but it just didn't win in the format wars. And notice that I've talked all about the formats, but I haven't actually talked about the movie itself. Well, I mean, admittedly, you know, there's a lot of cool stuff to talk about with the VHS format, and the fact that with a movie called VHS 2, they went the extra mile. But the movie itself, I really like the VHS series. I think that as far as found footage goes, I think they're some of the best. They're horror anthologies made by a ton of different filmmakers. Like, here you've got, on the back, you've got several directors. You've got Simon Barrett, Adam Wingard, Eduardo Sanchez, Greg Hale, Timo Janto, which I am sure that I've butchered, Gareth Hugh Evans, and Jason Eisner. And it says on the front, from the directors of The Raid, Hobo with a Shotgun, You're Next, and The Blair Witch Project. So you've got a pretty impressive horror caliber here, and I like the like broken tape kind of look for the skull there. Out of all the VHS films, I think this is the best one. The second one, the first one's good. Like, it has more segments. I want to say that this one has maybe like 4, and then it has like the wraparound segment to tie them all together. I think these ones, they're longer because there's fewer of them, but because of that, they have more room to tell a really fully developed story. The first one has more segments, and they can kind of vary from like really, really good to just kind of and then the third one is really not very good. Like, it has some moments, but it doesn't really compare to the first two. It's not totally worthless or anything, but it definitely is inferior to the first two, especially this one. If you're only going to watch one, watch this one. They're not connected to each other in any way outside of the name. But as far as like short films that are all tied together in an anthology format, and if you like anthologies and if you like found footage, this is among the best, if not the best, that you can find. So definitely recommend it very highly. But yeah, so I'm very pleased to have that back in the collection because I hated having to part with it. And I'm glad to have it back in this superior format that is really cool to show off. A superior format with an inferior format. How ironic is that? Alright, so first of all, we got Roy Dam here from that Mod Media Group archive from Las Vegas, Nevada. And we've got our handy-dandy nail clippers here to help us open it, because this one looks like it's tied up pretty tight, or taped up. And so I ordered 4 of them, 4 movies, but only 3 came in this particular package, and I knew that because he told me like a few days ago. But I do plan on ordering some more, and I know that the other one that I ordered that didn't get shipped this time, that one will be included in that shipment along with some other ones. And I told him just wait until I order the other one, so that way he only has to ship it once. Because I'm a nice guy like that. And I'm just going ahead and I'm opening them up for you so I can just show them to you in one go. And some of my themes for this particular batch were ones that they either haven't had a Blu-ray release at all or not in the United States for one reason or another. And that can be because of their, like, you know, potentially controversial nature, potentially controversial content, whatever it is. And they're from different eras and things, so we should talk about them. So first up, might as well get the big one out of the way, which is Song of the South, the film that Disney does not want released in the United States, even though what I find really funny about that whole thing, so they don't want it released in the US, it's not on Disney Plus, you know, they are very hush-hush about it. But they don't care as far as it getting released internationally. Like in Europe, they don't care. They put it out in Europe, no problem. And it also didn't stop them from re-releasing it in theaters as recently as the 80s. I want to say it was like 86 or something. And I think that was the last time that it was ever shown in theaters or really in any kind of wide circulation. Now, the animated segments of the film, Disney has not had a problem with releasing those as like bonus features of like the Alice in Wonderland 2004 DVD release. They included these segments as bonus features. And yeah, the animated segments are easily the best part of it, as well as some of the revolutionary, for the time, the revolutionary mixing of live action with animation in the Zippity Doodah sequence. And not to mention that Zippity Doodah as a song is so ubiquitous that people don't even know it's from this film. I didn't know that for years until I started researching the film. And, you know, it's something that I think... Well, plus, like, we wouldn't have Splash Mountain without this film, which, again, only based on the animated segments, which Disney's okay with. it's the live action segments that they have a problem with. And it's not surprising because, well, now there are some misconceptions about the live action segments, and then other things that are right on the money. One of the misconceptions is that it takes place during slavery, which it does not. It takes place following the Civil War, but it also, you have what I assume are former slaves still on the plantation, still doing what they would be doing otherwise, because, well, a historical fact is that after the Civil War ended, and it's a sad fact, but not only did it take quite a long time for the Emancipation Proclamation to filter its way through the various southern states, but it wasn't even really fully implemented in the way that we think it was. And even if slaves were freed on whatever level, for a lot of them, they didn't know any other life, and so they either stayed or had to return to their plantations, and it was a really sad thing. It's horrible to think about, but, so you do see that side of things, but as, is typical with 1940s Hollywood, it's like, it doesn't go into the nuances of all that, and so you just get the happy, I guess you'd say workers or former slaves. You'd see them all happy and singing songs, and they don't really go into the kind of miserable, inhuman aspects of the whole thing, which you wouldn't really expect in a kids film anyway. But still, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Plus the fact that you have the Uncle Remus, who James Baskett won a special Academy Award for his performance, and let me tell you, he really deserved it because he does a fantastic job in this role. And actually, Hattie McDaniel, who is Mammy in Gone with the Wind, she's back in this film, basically playing the same character, but she does a good job. I mean, she's not like a mainstay in it. She's not like the heart of the movie, which he definitely is. And he does a phenomenal job, so he absolutely deserved all the praise he got for this role. I think the thing on top of the just not really going into the whole, oppressiveness of the system of the institution of slavery and the industry of it and all that stuff. Not only do they not do that, which, I mean, you can't really expect them to in a kids film, but if on top of them not really doing that, you also have the fact that there's the magical, not that N-word, the other N-word, that stereotype in literature and in film that's on full display here, as far as like the happy, jolly black person who helps the white character achieve his or her goal in the story. That stereotype is on full display here, and he's not literally magical, but he is in the sense that he's a master storyteller, and supposedly the author of the original Uncle Remus stories based it on a real person that he knew, and it was his attempt to try to capture some of the folk tales that were carried over from the slaves' native West African countries that kind of got adopted into this kind of Americana pastiche that defined like the antebellum South, and then eventually the Reconstruction era South and everything like that. Which on the one hand, it's like, well, those are. I would read comments when this would get uploaded to YouTube in parts. I would get comments back before people would turn off comments, or before they would not enable comments, or before YouTube had the be kind and respectful to others, that whole thing, the whole disclaimer. Before all of that, in the salad days of YouTube, when this would get uploaded, I remembered a lot of the top comments were not from a bunch of like racists or alt-right people, before that was even a term, before that was even a movement. It wasn't from them. It was actually from, nor was it from people like saying, oh, take this down, it's offensive. It was actually the top comments on the ones I watched. They were actually from people that said, this is part of our heritage. This is part of our, our storytelling tradition, and that it's a shame that it's not getting out there. And Walt Disney really wanted to adapt the Uncle Remus stories because he really loved them, and they were quite popular in their day. granted, they were, transcribed and written down by a white man, and there's some discrepancies as far as like the accuracy of the dialogue, of the accents, of the vernacular. There's some disputes about that, about how accurate it really was. And I don't think you'll ever get a 100% satisfactory answer, but it's kind of, I suppose you could say the original collection is sort of in a similar category to something like Uncle Tom's Cabin, in terms of, it meant something very different to the person who was actually writing it at the time, and then it kind of changed its meaning over time, or it's the way people looked at it. And the film is very much the same way. Now, as far as like you do, like the main kid, his dad in the film, his there's like a passing mention of like some, I guess, political papers he was writing, probably anti Reconstruction, probably even possibly early Ku Klux Klan, but that's never made explicit. In the same way that it's not made explicit in the Gone with the Wind film, even though in the Gone with the Wind book it is explicitly the Klan that Scarlett's second husband is dealing with and is a part of. So yeah, the movie's actually quite toned down from what the book was in that respect. But I got the film because, well, Disney doesn't release it in the U.S., and they don't even do it with the like the Warner Brothers when they put out Warner Brothers cartoons when they put out the censored 11, or any of the other ones that were had elements in them that were offensive, whether it was blackface or whether it was like anti-Japanese stereotypes, the ones that were made during World War II. They would put them out with a disclaimer on DVD, or like, which they've done that with Gone with the Wind on HBO Max. Disney, like they did like the text disclaimers on Disney Plus, but they would have to go a lot further with this film if they ever wanted to touch it. And to be honest, like, I don't really blame them for not wanting to touch it because, well, one, it might hurt their brand, and two, outside of the segments that they're okay with showing, like Zippity Doo Dah and like the animated segments, outside of that, like, even if you took all of the like the potentially like offensive or racist aspects, if you took all that out and just looked at it on a story level, the actual live action segments, if I'm being perfectly honest, they are boring. They're really boring and kind of sappy. But even so, it's a part of film history. The integration of live action with animation helped to lay the groundwork for like Mary Poppins and other ones that would later do that. And Zippity Doo Dah is a great song. Everybody knows it, even if they don't know it came from this. And we wouldn't have Splash Mountain without it. So again, because I'm all about preserving history, even the ugly parts, it's important to acknowledge the film for what it did and also decry the aspects of it that haven't aged so well. So yeah, long speech about why that's in there. But again, I do find it amusing that Disney has no problem with this being sold in Europe and in other countries where they don't have quite the same baggage that we have about these issues. And speaking of baggage that Europe does seem to have, still, not surprisingly, we got Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Oh boy. And this one has received a DVD release, but as far as I know, not a Blu-ray release. So I was glad that I got it through our dear friend Roy Dam. And so what makes this one controversial? So this was actually a Canadian Nazi exploitation film. It was not the first one. I believe, I don't know if this was the very first one, but there was one called Love Camp 7 or whatever, and that one is one of the earliest ones, and, this one was certainly one of the most well-known ones, and it, when did this come out? Can't remember exactly. It was I want to say it was like 73, 74, something like that. But anyway, yeah, this was a Nazi exploitation film, and it, not only that, but also kind of a sexploitation film because of two very noticeable reasons. So what makes it interesting, I think, is that, well, it was a Canadian film, so it wasn't like a lot of the Nazi exploitation films that would come along later that, or at the same time that were USA produced. But what's interesting, so in the 70s, you had, well, obviously the 70s was kind of the golden age of the exploitation film in general. But in the 70s, you had kind of this dearth of Nazi retrospective films, whether or not it was ones that were trying to go for more drama, like The Boys from Brazil, or was the Odessa File, was that one in the 60s or the 70s? I want to say that might have been the late 60s, but it's still in that rough time period. Um, and but you had a lot of, because a lot of real life Nazi hunters like uh, Eli Wiesel, they were starting to track down these Nazis that escaped justice around that time. Plus, also it's the 30-year. A lot of nostalgia or a lot of retrospectives of various sorts, they tend to come in 30-year cycles. And in this case, it's not so much nostalgia, but just more memories or more, that just seems to be how it works now. In the Nazi exploitation genre, you had it's the exploitation of Nazi atrocities to kind of fulfill the more prurient aspects of the exploitation film audience, because, well, it was a real event and no one owns the copyright on those particular atrocities. So you had the sleazoids who would go in and make whatever film they wanted, and then you combine it with some of the more fetishistic aspects of how people look at Nazism and also this exploitation subgenre. You kind of throw them all together and you get Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. And this was such a big hit that it spawned some kind of sort of sequels. Then you had the Ilsa character, even though she dies in this one, but you have her going through different time periods, different environments, like She-Wolf of Spielberg, Tigress of Siberia, Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks. It's just pick an exotic location, pick a kind of repressive environment for Diane Thorne to look all kind of dominatrixy and to oppress people or whatever, and boom, you got it. And so, that is something that I think that it certainly is a significant aspect of the larger exploitation blanket, and then this Nazi exploitation subgenre. This is one that most people have at least heard of, and it got so mainstream that the character was even referred to in reviews of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, even though that's the Soviet Union and not the Nazis. But they were talking about Irina Spalko in there. She's definitely in that mold for sure. But it's something that it is nonetheless part of cinematic history, even if people don't really know how pervasive it really is. But again, part of preserving film history, part of acknowledging some of the uglier sides of our history as a whole instead of putting it under a basket. And then finally, similar, but actually in the 60s, I want to say like 65, 66, 65, something like that. But you got the Russ Meyer film Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. And Russ Meyer's an interesting filmmaker because he he was coming up in the era of like when Playboy magazine was first really starting to make waves. This is cool. It's got the Blu-ray and the DVD. How cool is that? This is another one that like the DVD is out, but it's super rare and expensive, and I don't know if there is an official Blu-ray of this or whatever. But again, the inside art and everything is really, really well done. Definitely worth it. Russ Meyer is an interesting person because he was coming on the scene at around the same time that early Playboy magazine was starting to make a splash, and you had somebody like Hugh Hefner, who was part of the sexual revolution of the 60s, and he was someone that when he died, I remembered people were sort of divided on what his legacy should be, because they were like, well, he was a feminist and he contributed to the sexual revolution, and then people were like, oh, but he was objectifying women and that kind of stuff. So, and neither answer is necessarily the whole story, and I've personally found that quite refreshing, because I hate when people, when they die, famous people, they get put in these like good guy or bad guy categories, and everyone in history is a mixture of the two. It's just like what percentage of either category did they show. In this case, I think you have a similar case to be made with Russ Meyer, where, yeah, he had really, boobalicious women in his films. Like, he had a very particular type of body that he tended to like in his films, but like Roger Ebert, on the back it says the breasts are not always the center of desire. Instead, they're weapons used to intimidate men. And Roger Ebert actually wrote the script for a Russ Meyer film, one of my all-time favorite films, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Has some of the best dialogue I've ever heard in any movie. So in other words, like, yeah, he has the big-breasted women, but in this case and in other films, the assertiveness and the power that those women exude is such that I don't think you can really classify it in the traditional, like, objectification kind of categories. If anything, certain critics have looked back on his filmmaking, and they have said that his filmography, that he's sort of like a proto-feminist filmmaker, and I think you could definitely make that argument. I'm personally of the belief that there's nothing wrong with appreciating the human form, male or female, and you know, so in this, it just depends on how it's presented, of course. And in this case, and in other Russ Meyer cases, you really get the sense that the females, that they are okay. It's okay for them to be good looking and voluptuous, but they can also be very assertive and very take charge. They can get what they want out of their lives. They have agency, all the essential things that you want out of a good character, not just a good female character, but just with the added bonus of them, being good looking and not being afraid to show that. And as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing wrong with that for men or women. But yeah, so those are the three that I got. The other ones, the fourth one was Teeth, the 2007 film Teeth, and I wanted to get that one because, well, the DVD is a little pricey and it's not on Blu-ray, and that's another kind of interesting, like, female empowerment one, because that one's about vagina dentata, meaning a vagina that has teeth inside of it, which apparently has quite the rich folkloric history. You may not have known that, but I will be very interested to see how that one turns out, because I've always wanted to see that film. But yeah, I had no idea that it actually has quite a rich history to it, that whole idea. And so that's that for our dear Mod Media Group archive. And we're going to dive into our dear friend JDC Outlet, see what he's got for us. I'm really very appreciative of this seller in particular because of the good deals I get and some of the good selection of older releases that I can find for cheap. Very pleased about that. And so we're gonna see what kind of randomness we got here. As per usual with JDC Outlet, we usually get a pretty wide selection of things across different genres. It's not all one or the other, and that's how we like it. So what all do we have in here today? We have several things. I'm just going to go through them one at a time. We got something called Exit Humanity, which I think is a zombie film. It's one of those, like, I want to say it was maybe $8 or less. But I am finding with zombie films, because, see, I never really liked zombies until the coronavirus hit. And then I started to research every zombie film I could think of because of the pandemic aspect and needing to make sure that I was up to date on, like, infection protocols and, like, just how bad can things get in an extreme setting. But yeah, with this film, this one is it's a zombie film. I think what I've found is that a lot of the more obscure zombie films, I think that they can definitely illuminate different aspects of the zombie genre than a lot of the mainstream ones can. And usually with a good zombie film, it's usually not about the zombies themselves. It's more so about how they affect the surviving humans and the world around them. That usually makes the drama. And then next up, we got some sharksploitation action for you with Deep Blue Sea, which I've always wanted to see. I always liked the title, and it's got Samuel L. Jackson in it, who, you know, every movie that he's in is made better because he's in it, and he's in a lot of movies. He's in no shortage of movies, but still, yeah, Deep Blue Sea. And speaking of VHS, we got these two. We've got VHS 1 and VHS Viral. Woo! And that's why I wanted to make sure that I got the second one, because I knew I was getting these, so I've got the whole trilogy again. I don't know if VHS Viral, I don't know if it comes with a slipcover or not, but these two are the Canadian versions, and put out by Entertainment One, which is like a, the big distributor in Canada, and this one is actually sealed, but or kind of sealed. But yeah, so the first one, as I mentioned, the individual segments, they can be good or okay. I don't remember there being any that were outright bad, but this one definitely did start things on a positive note. So definitely worth, for sure, the first two, checking those out, if not the rest of them. But yeah, I'm glad that I found this one with the slipcover, because I didn't used to have the one with the slipcover. And then VHS Viral, which I already mentioned, is not that great, but I wanted to complete the set. And yeah, it has some good segments. Just some of it is not, doesn't quite follow the same rules that the other ones did, in terms of, like, because that's a big pet peeve of mine with found footage films, that they don't adhere to the found footage form all the way through. That's something that that I don't like. So, but I think this cover is actually quite a bit cooler than the American one. Anyway, moving right along, we got one that I've always wanted to see, Stir of Echoes, which, from what I've heard, is in a similar vein to The Sixth Sense, and I believe came out in the same year, 1999. But yeah, I've heard it's kind of underrated. I'm a little surprised that the only release of it is this old Lionsgate one, that, like, Scream Factory hasn't put it out or anything. I remember seeing this movie in theaters, Defiance, with Daniel Craig. This was, like, immediately following Casino Royale, and I believe in the same year as Quantum of Solace, which I didn't really care for. I barely remember it, to be honest. But yeah, this one, I remembered it was alright. I wanted to watch it again because it's been so long, but I really love Edward Zwick, the director who did one of my favorite movies of all time, The Last Samurai, and he also did Glory, which is a very good Civil War film. And then we got this one, which was recommended to me by a friend, Layer Cake, and this is a Matthew Vaughn film. Matthew Vaughn and Guy Ritchie, they both kind of did similar, like, British, like, crime, action, gangster films. And, Matthew Vaughn, as a filmmaker, he did one of the best X-Men films, First Class, which was my favorite up until Days of Future Past. But yeah, this one's got Daniel Craig again, Cole Meany, Kenneth Cranham, George Harris, Jamie Foreman, Sienna Miller, and Michael Gambon. So that's pretty cool. And then we've got some Asylum action for you. Their version of the Three Musketeers with guns and, making it all modernized. And of course, one of my favorite things about the Asylum films that come out on physical media, whenever they have a quote on the back that's unattributed, which is just great. An action-packed thrill ride in the tradition of Mission Impossible and the Bourne trilogy. I love that it's a quote that they don't have any without an attribution, and what's so great about that is you can say anything you want about the film and it'll fool people into thinking that some critic said that when they didn't, and I just think that's great. But yeah, the Asylum, they're the masters of being able to take anything that's in the public domain that kind of sort of resembles what the big boys are doing, and they can crank something out that is similar enough to that thing so they can make a buck off of it. But you will find some gems in there. Like, I really liked Avengers Grimm. That was surprisingly good relative to its budget. And speaking of Matthew Vaughn and Guy Ritchie, you got Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which, yeah, Jason Statham again. Yeah, directed by Guy Ritchie and partially, was it produced? Yeah, by Matthew Vaughn. And another one that same friend recommended, so eager to check that out. It was all based on when I had watched Dom Hemingway with what's his face, Jude Law, which we unboxed some time ago. When I watched that film, I was very pleased with how smart and snappy the dialogue was, and what a great character Dom Hemingway was. And so he recommended those to me because they were in a similar vein. And then we got we've got a Uwe Boll film, the first one in my collection, Assault on Wall Street, which I have heard is actually one of his better ones. He's an interesting person because he does have quite the reputation, not only for schlock, but for abusing the German tax credits at the time. And then it says here, with the participation of the Canadian film or video tax credit, because I know that that's part of how he was able to have a film career for a while, was that he was able to, do some tax loopholes with the German government and with Canada, I guess. Now, I know that there still is a tax credit for shooting in Canada. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it's such that he was able to make these low-budget films and not have to lose a lot of money, which admittedly I think is really, really smart. Whether or not the movie's good is another matter, but that is a smart business decision. But I've heard that this is one of his better ones. When he's unfettered by the lack of a video game license to have to adhere to, which apparently they don't really give a lot of guidance at least they didn't when he was making his video game adaptations, but when he's not really dealing with having to worry about a video game license, apparently his films get better as a result, like this one, and I've heard that his Rampage films are really good. So, I think that'd be an interesting comparison because, maybe he's just someone who needs original ideas, which, I think most people do. And then we've got The Legend of Zorro, which I remembered watching in the theater, and we already unboxed The Mask of Zorro a couple of videos ago. I remembered this film. I saw it in the theater. I remembered being very disappointed with it, but I also haven't seen it in forever, and I wanted to complete the Antonio Banderas Zorro films. There are a ton more Zorro films that came before The Mask of Zorro, which I'll need to see if I can track down, because Zorro's quite an old character, older than the Mask of Zorro film. But yeah, I remembered I found this very disappointing, but I also have not seen it in forever, so be interesting to check it out again. This was one that my ex-fiance really loved, and it's one that I feel bad, honestly, for the writer-director, Kurt Wimmer. I feel bad for him because apparently with this film, it was Ultraviolet. Apparently for this film, this was like $3 or $4, but I remembered seeing it with my ex-fiance. She really loved the film. I remembered feeling really sad for Kurt Wimmer, whatever. I remember feeling really sad for him because I knew that apparently a good chunk of the movie that he shot and wrote, apparently a good chunk of it was cut out. This is the theatrical cut. There is an unrated cut on DVD only, but it apparently only adds like a few things back in. It's not even most of what was cut, and that's too bad because you can tell that there's a good movie in here somewhere, but it just got chopped to shit, and it's like, I feel really bad because it seemed like he was trying to go for a pretty original idea, at least from what I could tell, and the action sequences are pretty good. Like, they're a little overblown in their lighting. It's a little tear there. Little overblown, like with the overexposed backgrounds, or at least that's kind of the look of it. But again, like, I could see what he was going for. It definitely looks good. It looks unique and different. I just wish that he could have gotten more of the treatment that he probably wanted or deserved, and then he might have gotten his own Matrix. You don't know, but yeah, it's too bad that it didn't get treated. He didn't get treated the way he wanted. But at the very least, like there's a decent idea in there, and it does look good. This is another one I've been meaning to rewatch because I remembered not really caring for it at the time that I saw it, but I also haven't seen it in forever. It was Real Steel, and this was a Sean Levy film, and he actually went on to do a lot of my favorite episodes of Stranger Things, which is pretty cool. Because yeah, as a director, he did things like this and Date Night and some more like kind of mainstream films, kind of mainstream comedies, and he's someone that I think he's got a good touch for directing like kids and just has a good kind of finger on the pulse of the audience. I think he doesn't really get enough credit for that. But yeah, he did some of my favorite episodes of Stranger Things, so, even more so than the ones that were done by the Duffer Brothers who created the show, so that's pretty good. But yeah, that one I remember just kind of thinking, well, it's a little too, like, kind of 80s sports movie-ish, like, in a bad way, but I think people that like the film, that they like it for those reasons. And I like Hugh Jackman, I like Evangeline Lilly, so I want to check it out again. This is one I watched with my ex-fiance, and I had never seen it, but I remembered really liking it, surprisingly, which was Role Models. And I liked this one because I thought that the chemistry that Paul Rudd and Seann William Scott had was pretty good. I liked what's his name? Jane Lynch was good in this. Elizabeth Banks was good in it. Christopher Mintz-Plasse, yes, I liked what he did in here. It's a good kind of send-up of, like, LARPers and everything. And it's got some good references to, like, Love Gun era Kiss, up to and including them replicating as much of the makeup as they, I assume, could get away with without having to actually pay for being able to use the makeup, because I am sure that it was very expensive, and they probably had to pay a lot for even the little bits that they could get. I kind of wish that they would have gone all the way, because they went as far as, like, to show the cover of Love Gun and to, like, license the song, but it's like I would have liked it if they could have gone all the way with the makeup, but again, that probably was really, really pricey, because I know that the cost of the being able to, like, use the makeup or whatever, I'm sure it was astronomical. Speaking of a film that, it's Dylan Dog, Dead of Night there with Brandon Routh, which I feel sorry for Brandon Routh, because, like, I saw him in person at a convention, and he kind of went back to getting some kind of stardom in the Arrowverse on TV when he played the Atom, which is pretty sweet, because he went from Superman to the Atom and seems to have gotten a whole new audience that way, but I just kind of felt bad that he never really got, like, leading man status again on film. And this is another one that's based on a more obscure comic. It was also cheap, and the cover's different and more interesting than the American one. And I wanted to see this because I've heard it's kind of getting a cult following now. So, but yeah, I just, I feel sorry for Brandon Routh, because I do think that, and this is a problem that you run into with actors who have played Superman, is that oftentimes they find it difficult to escape the Superman curse, and they don't even have to die or get, paralyzed like Christopher Reeve did, or kill themselves like George Reeves, but they don't even have to have that. It could just be that they they never get seen as anything other than Superman, which is too bad. But I liked what he did with Superman. He was basically doing Christopher Reeve, but I think he did well with it. We got another Asylum film, I Am Omega, which this came out at around the time of I Am Legend, and they got the title because the version, the adaptation of the novel I Am Legend that was in the 70s with Charlton Heston was called Omega Man, and so they're obviously trying to reference that while also referencing I Am Legend. And I Am Omega is actually a pretty darn good title, and I like the cover too. But again, it's always really cool to see what the Asylum and what the Fringes do with things that are big, that the mainstream does, because you can learn a lot. Whether what to do or what not to do, you can learn a lot from what the Fringes do. And I love the Echo Bridge logo on the description on the back. The entertainment alternative for what the world wants to see. How presumptuous. And then we got a film that I don't think was all that well received initially, but it also has gotten a bit of a following, is the 2011 prequel to John Carpenter's The Thing, also called The Thing. And I remembered, and I've mentioned Brad Jones, the cinema snob, in his worst of whatever year lists. And number 2 on his 2011 worst of was this film, because I guess that he's just such a fanboy for the first one that anything different or that expands upon it, I guess, is unacceptable. But you find that with a lot of internet critics from that particular, 80s generation. They're the ones that are like first to throw stones at the prequel trilogy of Star Wars or the sequel trilogy of Star Wars or anything remotely different. They're the first to throw stones without really being fair to the filmmakers or to the work they put in. I have not seen this film. I am eager to check it out just because I want to see what the prequel has in store. And people were saying, oh, it's not really a prequel, it's a remake, it's a crappy remake, but it is a prequel. And I got this one because I managed to find it with the slipcover, and it's got the French there, and it looks cool. This cover looks cooler than the Mill Creek one that came out recently. Even though it's essentially the same thing, except this takes up all of it. But I think this looks a little cooler. But yeah, I'm interested to check that out. I also want to get The Thing from Another World, which was the original film that most people haven't seen. That one I did see as a kid. And I did not see John Carpenter's The Thing until a couple months ago. And then we got Liev Schreiber, The Last Days on Mars, with that much, much cooler Canadian slipcover. The Canadian slipcovers tend to be a lot cooler, I think, than the American ones. Not just in terms of the fact that you feel all super cool for having the French on there, but also because they just, compositionally speaking, they tend to look cooler. And this is one that I used to have in the collection, never watched it, but I like Liev Schreiber. I think he's kind of an underappreciated actor. And, just eager to check it out. And it had the slipcover, and it was cheap. And then got only 2 more to go. Skyline. This was a film that I remembered seeing in one of my used Blu-ray stores. Never saw it, but then Beyond Skyline, that was a movie I wanted to get kind of sight unseen, but I never did, and because that's like a direct-to-video sequel to this. And I saw it in a store the other day, and I will probably pick that up because I did find it with the slipcover, but I wanted to see the first one first. This one was one of the pricier ones. It was like $10, and I say pricier just relative to everything. But it came with a slipcover. This design's really cool. It's a lot cooler than the American one, and I'm eager to check it out because I love sci-fi. And from the visual effects masterminds behind Avatar, Iron Man 2, and 300. Oh boy. And then last but not least, this is one that you've seen before, but I managed to find it with the slipcover, was The Cell. I didn't even know that this came with a slipcover. It definitely does not in the United States, but this Canadian version did, and I had no idea, but glad to have finally found it with the slip. Sold the other one to help offset the cost of this one. This is probably the priciest one, like $15 or something like that. But highly, highly underrated film, I think. I think Jennifer Lopez does a really good job. She looks probably the most beautiful she's ever looked, and I love the visual aesthetic. I love what Vince Vaughn and Vincent D'Onofrio did in the story. They did really good performances. I think it's quite an underrated film. I know Roger Ebert was a huge fan of this film. It didn't do all that great commercially or critically, and people like the Nostalgia Critic really don't like it, which, again, is considered the source, but I think that this film is very underrated, and I didn't agree with Roger Ebert on certain things, but he would stick his neck out for certain films that he felt were underrated, like this one in Dark City, and I could agree with him on both of those, and especially this one, and I'm really glad that he did stick his neck out for it, and he put it as one of his favorite films of 2000, which is really cool of him. Anyway, we have quite the smorgasbord here. But yeah, it's good because I haven't done one of these in a while and I've kind of missed it. So thank you for watching. And if you like this, then please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon, set phasers to stun, warp factor 5. Let me know if you want to see more pickup videos, more kind of analysis videos. I was gonna try to build a dedicated PC for editing so I could do more formal reviews and less vlog style videos, but I'm gonna try to see what I can do that's free with the laptop that I already have, and then I'll be able to kind of know what I need. If I really even need anything, maybe my laptop can do the job, I don't know, but I know that eventually you'll want to see more than just me talking to the camera with no edits, but I've been trying to give you good content nonetheless, because there is an art to being able to speak to the camera without edits. So yeah, just let me know what you want to see more of, and I will oblige. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video. There will be some more stuff coming in the mail that I've pre-ordered, so please stay tuned and continue to stay safe.